release from in the morning.
Here we go again. It's like this every other day, isn't it? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Breaking Better News. I'm your host, as always, your friendly neighborhood, the sexy Simpsons kid, the sexiest Simpsons kid alive. Even though I'm probably the only one alive, that still makes me the sexiest. Max Derrick. And joining me for this episode on short notice is the boss, Allison Tiemann. How you doing, Allison?
I'm doing okay. This is definitely an interesting story.
Yeah, right before we started, some new details were actually just brought to Allison's attention. She was following this beforehand, and she brought it to my attention. So this is going to be a relatively off-the-cuff discussion of what this story contains. So, a California lawmaker known as Cristina Garcia, that's Christina with a C, a Democrat from Bell Gardens, who has also been at the forefront of California's #MeToo movement, has been accused of groping a former legislative staff member. A man named Daniel Fierro said that Garcia cornered him at a legislative softball game in 2014, stroked his back, squeezed his ass, and attempted to grab his crotch as he escaped. Fierro said he came forward because he heard others may have had similar experiences with Garcia. He said he did not want any lack of Garcia's credibility to stop the issue of sexual misconduct from being addressed, but he still felt it was necessary to point out this alleged hypocrisy. He added that his mandatory sexual harassment training had never included examples where the victim was a man and the perpetrator was a woman, so he, quote, didn't have a way to frame it in his mind. Garcia says she has zero recollection of engaging in inappropriate behavior, and such behavior is inconsistent with her values. That's a direct quote from her. An outside firm is currently investigating the incident. Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon made the following statement regarding the investigation. Quote, I trust that while the investigation proceeds, Assemblymember Garcia will respond appropriately and in a way that fortifies the legislature's effort to create a new climate. As in other cases, while the investigation moves forward, I am also asking Assembly Human Resources to reach out to Assemblymember Garcia's staff to ensure they feel safe in their work environment. Another unnamed lobbyist from Sacramento said Garcia cornered him at a fundraiser in May 2017, made a graphic sexual proposal, and tried to grab his crotch. Garcia, along with 146 other women, published an open letter last October, slamming a pervasive culture of harassment in California politics. Garcia also heads the California Legislative Women's Caucus, which has been pushing for an overhaul of sexual harassment policies. And just before we started, we learned that Garcia was, I think, pressured to take a leave of absence from her position at the moment. Now, Allison, with all of this information in mind, first of all, I just want to ask, what are your thoughts on the credibility of these allegations? And two, if they are credible, do you think that maybe the reason why we see so many people speaking out against sexual harassment and then they themselves are accused of sexual harassment is that maybe they're using this as a way to try and cope with their guilt?
Wow, that is a mouthful. Okay, first of all, I want to quote from, before I start to answer all of those, this is what Garcia herself had to say. Upon reflection of the details alleged, I am certain I did not engage in the behavior I am accused of. However, as I've said before, any claims about sexual harassment must be taken seriously, and I believe elected officials should be held to a higher standard of accountability. Therefore, I am voluntarily taking an immediate unpaid leave from my position in the State Assembly. Now, what's interesting to me is up to this point, I believe the general tenor of Me Too is that when a man has an allegation leveled against him, the pressure is for him to resign from his position entirely. Not to take unpaid leave and wait for the investigation to conclude, which is a reason. I mean, to be honest, that's the way all of these should be occurring. You should maybe take unpaid leave, wait for the investigation to conclude, and then any resignation or career effect to the career of the man should wait till after the investigation concludes and some sort of result is decided upon, not before. So Garcia, being a woman, is being afforded the benefit of due process here, which is exactly what should happen in every case. But of course, only apparently women in this atmosphere deserve it. Because as I said, if this was not Cristina Garcia, but Chris Garcia, people would be calling for his head, and they would be calling for his immediate resignation, especially since Chris Garcia works in a situation where he has access to a vulnerable population, and people who have experienced sexual abuse and sexual assault, potentially. You know, a lot of them are going to definitely be victims. So Chris Garcia is in a position where he has access to these vulnerable people. And I think in that case, there would be even more of a push to see Chris Garcia removed from his career path and forced to resign from his job. But of course, we're dealing with a Cristina Garcia, or a Christine Garcia, so the rules are completely different. Due process is back in style. Okay, to answer your other questions, I think that these, just judging from what I've heard of these particular allegations, first of all, what's being alleged actually is sexual assault. It's not a situation where a woman consents to go to a man's hotel room and consents when he says, "Can I show you my penis?" She says yes. Or, "Can I engage in this sexual behavior?" She says yes. It's not a situation where consent was communicated and then afterwards she felt uncomfortable and decided retroactively that no, it wasn't really consensual because the man in question had power over her or was a popular figure or whatever. This is definitively sexual assault. She cornered this man, started to grope him, and when he was escaping, attempted to grope him further. At some point, one would assume that, you know, between the beginning of the groping and the attempt to escape, a normal person would have recognized that he didn't want it. Oh, actually, I believe the description of the event is that he turned his back to her, and that in the process of attempting to escape her, he momentarily became vulnerable to her touching him again, and so she did. So, I mean, if there's that nonverbal communication of disinterest, and that's actually the most extreme form. I've had this conversation before. Even people who do the no but yes dance, so they want you to pursue them, they don't want you to take a no for an answer, they just want to see you get a little bit, you know, get more interest, you know, demonstrate that you're interested in pursuing them. Even people who do that, when they turn away physically and start presenting their back to you, that is a definite no. So if this was the case, if I'm reading this accurately, and she started groping him, he turned his back to her and attempted to escape, at that point in time, every human being on the planet should have known that that was a no and to cease and desist.
Yeah, you're turning 180 in the other direction.
Yeah, you're turning one. And like I said, even people who do the whole the whole verbal contradiction dance, when they turn 180 on the other direction, they mean it. So there's no way that Cristina Garcia did not know that this man did not want to be touched by her, if the allegations are true. And as to the credibility of them, first of all, yes, this was indeed sexual assault. Yes, any normal person would have understood that when someone turns 180 and presents their back to you, that means they know. And also, this seems to be a very credible allegation to me because it's not actually coming years after the fact. He described the incident at the time it happened to another individual, and that individual is the one bringing the allegation, who brought the allegation to the fore. So it's unlikely that he would have had no reason to describe this incident. There's no motive for him to describe this incident, and because when he described the incident, it had just happened. And he wasn't pursuing any kind of legal redress. He was not pursuing any kind of HR complaint or anything. He was just apparently shocked, and he had expressed and described the incident to a third party. And he's even said that he doesn't want this necessarily. He's disappointed with the hypocrisy, but he doesn't want this to reflect badly on the Me Too movement. In that sense, because he doesn't really have a motive, he was never pursuing any kind of... And that's the thing. The motive for a false accuser is to pursue some form of punishment against the person they're falsely accusing. He's not pursuing that. He didn't pursue it initially. And he has that witness. So I would say that this is a very credible, and it's not just because it's a man. And then we get into the fact that we have a second person coming forward.
Yeah, and his description of what happened is very similar in that she did the exact same thing where she tried to grab both of their crotches.
So it's sounding like, and again, I don't want to say that it's more credible when men come forward, but when men come forward, they do not have a social... They don't have the benefit of a society that's going to accept the allegation and not accuse them of being, you know, gay, not accuse them of actually, you know, not question. There's a greater societal expectation that men always be ready for sexual behavior with women. And when a man says, no, I didn't want this, there's much more pushback to that. There's much more pushback to the idea that a man rejected a woman sexually than there is when women reject men sexually. As we know, society expects women to be the gatekeepers in sex and expects women to put up resistance, to have their default be no. And that's not the case with men. So when a man comes forward, he has to come forward most likely knowing that he's not going to get an incredibly positive reception and that his very identity as a man will be questioned by a lot of people. And I believe in this article from Hello Giggles, they're also insinuating that that a powerful woman might be a target. Assemblywoman Susan Talamantes-Eggman, when you play that role, you make yourself a target. She's referring to Christina Garcia. Her entire elected career and previous to that as an activist has been the tip of the spear, charging forward to give voice to the underserved and the voiceless. When you play that role, you make yourself a target. So here we see, published in presumably I guess a reputable news outlet, Susan
Giggles.
Sorry? Hello
Giggles.
Giggles.
Not really.
Susan Talamantes-Eggman. Well, obviously they must be somewhat reputable, or at least they're quoting some reputable news outlet if this assemblywoman is giving them a statement. So we see Susan Talamantes-Eggman engaging in victim blaming of the individual who came forward, Fierro. So, in saying that he's coming forward in order to make Susan, not because he actually experienced sexual violence, but of course, he's targeting this Cristina Garcia. So, I mean, we're already seeing that in the press, that they are giving voice to people who are victim blaming Fierro. And that's to be expected when you're dealing with a man coming forward against a woman. There's a considerably more social bias against male victims of sexual assault, especially by women. And the other thing I wanted to mention is a while back or actually last week in the Rant Zerker, I mentioned that the only thing that will stop the excesses of the Me Too movement is if men start to come forward. And this is exactly the situation that I'm talking about. Now that a man has come forward, it has expanded the dialogue, not just men being victims, but also what's the acceptable response to someone who has been accused of sexual assault. How should we proceed when someone is accused of sexual assault? And as we can see with Cristina Garcia, who's being afforded due process, she's being afforded to take unpaid leave rather than resign immediately and lose her entire career. As we can see, this is more of an appropriate response. And of course, it's an appropriate response because Crystal Garcia is a woman, as opposed to the other individuals who've been charged who've been men. But it opens up that discussion of what is an appropriate response. And I would say that Fierro, that's how you pronounce his name because I'm terrible at pronouncing names, is actually somewhat heroic in coming forward, knowing the kind of social opprobrium that he's going to face as a man charging a woman, knowing that news outlets are going to have no problem saying things like quoting Assemblywoman Susan Talamantes-Eggman, even having to deal with somebody who's presumably representing the people, victim blaming him openly, knowing that he's going to have to face all that, and he still came forward and did not deny the truth of his vulnerability to this potential predator. And that's actually very heroic, and it's only him, male male survivors who've experienced this from women who are going to force the conversation and not just accepting the fact that this is not a gendered thing. From the statistics that I've read and I've researched, it's entirely likely that there is an epidemic, a silent epidemic of male victims of sexual assault, sexual harassment in the workplace, and everything that we say that is almost exclusively done by men to women. And they never talk about it because of that social expectation that men not deny women's sexual advances. And men like Fierro really are forcing the dialogue. And they're forcing the dialogue even despite the pressure and the implications and the fact that they are going to lose their positive social identity in the process. That they might lose their positive social identity. So in that sense, I think he's a hero. And he's also forcing the dialogue over what is the appropriate response to someone who's accused of these issues. Because now we can't just default to the throw a book at him, lynch him, not when women are also involved. It means that society has to look at the issue of due process. It has to actually look at it, actually consider it. So I think this is very positive. I think that Daniel Fierro is a hero for coming forward, especially in the climate that he's dealing with. Yes. I can't believe that Hello Giggles just uncritically reports. Well, I guess that doesn't mean that they agree with Susan Talamenti's Eggman, but wow, Assemblywoman, that's quite the statement to make there. I'm surprised you haven't also been requested to resign. Anyway, but like I said, different rules for male victims.
That's the type of content that you do expect from Hello Giggles. By the way, despite our assessment, Allison and my assessments, let's just remember that we still have to go through due process and make sure that everybody gets their day in court and all the facts can come forward.
Yes, definitely.
But having said all that, I just want to echo a lot of what Allison said. There are a lot of male victims of sexual misconduct, and I definitely feel like I've talked to a lot of my male friends who have been aggressed against sexually, and they don't speak up about it. You know, guys, this is your time as well. You can't just hope that, Corey Feldman can come forward and that will be enough for all the male victims. No, there are people like Daniel, if he's telling the truth, we should follow his lead, especially if you are yourself a victim of this type of behavior. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for watching this episode of Breaking Better News. If you want to continue this conversation down below, we'd really love to hear what all your thoughts are, whether you agree with our assessment of the situation or disagree. Please just leave your comments down below. We'd love to hear everything that you guys have to say. If you like this particular video, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm. It just tells YouTube, hey, our content's worth watching. Spread it around, get more people to watch it. And also, if you want to see more content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We do tons of videos all the time, every single day here at Honey Badger Radio. If you like this video, there's more where that came from. I want to thank Allison for joining me on this episode on such short notice. And before we go, Allison, do you want to do the shill?
I shall do the shill. So if you really enjoy this content, if you've really enjoyed it, like really, 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 really enjoyed it, please consider. I wonder if that'll get us more. Please consider becoming a patron. www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio.
That'll do it for us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Allison. And
until
Until next time, stay yellow.